Sorry, I was on my tech duties.
It's good to see you, Commissioner. All right, it is 10:01. So let's give another moment to try to get Commissioner Moody on. But before we get started, Commissioners, I'm wondering if I can your support to rearrange the schedule a little bit. I think the most important thing that we talk about today is going to COVID and recovery and declaration.
Mayor, hold on. Just everybody needs to put their mics on mute. I can hear someone typing.
Yeah, I can't see. I know there's a lot of people on, so that would be helpful. Thanks. So what I would like to do is rearrange the schedule a little bit if you're supportive of this and get through the 4 action items so that we have ample time to have discussion about the issues that I think are most important for us to discuss today while we're together. So if you are, and then I know we have economic development project team at 12:30. City Manager, is that still?
That is correct.
Okay. So hopefully if we can get through the action items, that will give us plenty of time to talk through a number of the really core issues, important issues that we need to talk about today with our city manager and emergency operating team. So do I see head nods that you're okay with a little bit of rearranging? Okay. Okay. Do we have Commissioner Moody with us yet? Okay. Well, I think because we're going to start with these action items and we do have a quorum, I'll go ahead and get started. And hopefully he will join us as quickly as possible. I know IT is working with him. So let's start with the first item, Commissioners. This is a resolution approving polling locations and fixing election inspector pay for August 4th, our upcoming primary, which we know the election is a really important day and we need to be prepared for that. So can I get a motion?
So moved.
Okay, moved and supported. Commissioners, any questions about that? All right, you probably have seen that our city clerk has sent out applications to residents, and so hopefully they will get those in the mail this week. Commissioner Lanier?
Yep, so not really a question, but a suggestion. City clerk, if possible, maybe we can engage some of the neighborhood associations near those precincts just to kind of have another way of communicating to persons in that area about this change.
Right. I just want to give a brief update about the applications. So the applications to the permanent list went out yesterday. And then next week will be the list that will be all the applications that go out to all city voters will go out next week. And I've had a press release that went out this morning, and I'm already doing WGVU a couple times tomorrow, and we'll be pushing that out. So that's kind of the big thing. So I'm going to imagine that it's going to be low turnout in precincts in August, being that we're sending out absentee applications to all voters. And so we'll see how that's going to affect for November as well, because they're dual applications, so they can apply for August and November, or November only, or August only. So the voters have a lot of options. But yeah, we're going to be pushing out a lot of information here in the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
And City Clerk, I did have a follow-up question. As I was reading the memo, I don't have it in front of me, but it listed the dollar amounts for the polling locations.
Yes.
And I know that Commissioner Moody had requested that amount be increased, and it really didn't say what the prior amount was. So it was hard to see if that was an increase and what that increase was, so I can capture that for him, because I know he asked about that.
Right. It actually wasn't, the polling location prices weren't in for this one. It's 150. When I started 2 years ago, it was $60 a precinct. We went to 100, and then we went to $150 for polling locations. And the election worker pay went up as well in March, and we're going to keep those same rates for March, August, and November for our workers.
Yeah. And I think, if my memory is serving me correctly, I think what he was suggesting is as we continue to have polling locations disengage with our elections, that it could be tied to the resources that they're putting into the opening in maintaining their facilities being open for such a long period of time, including days before a setup is happening. So I wonder if, I don't know if you do exit interviews or, if there's a way to survey those who may have participated to see if that could be a factor. I know sometimes it just isn't, but
No, we
I'm
talked
not
to him.
remembering everything he said, so I'm
Sure.
doing my
No,
best to remember that.
That's good. And I've had that conversation too. I think the issue, when I've talked to them is something's changed in the congregation, a pastor's changed, something like that. It's more the location. The building remains the same, but the body is different. The church isn't a building, as we all know. The church is the people. The building just shelters. Sometimes when the body changes, then the new body in that building doesn't want to participate anymore.
Philosophy
I haven't heard
changes.
anything mostly about prices.
Okay, thank you.
Did the city clerk just preach?
Thank
That's
you.
Sermonette.
Thanks,
We-
everyone. All right, City
The
Clerk.
church has been meeting everywhere else. We have new language.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Madam Mayor. Commissioner Moody's in the attendee list. Can you promote him up to the panelist?
Yes, got it.
Thank you, Doug, for your help with that.
Commissioner Moody, you are in.
Great. So Commissioner Moody, we're just getting ready to vote on item number 3. So we skipped the first 2 and we're going to, it's good to see you. So we're just getting ready to vote on the first item or the first action item, and then we're going to come back up for the COVID and the emergency response discussion. So we,
Mayor,
Madam.
excuse me, if you don't mind, can I give him the update that the city clerk gave about the dollar amount for the location?
yes, absolutely, Commissioner.
So Commissioner Moody, I recall you're asking the question about polling locations and wanting those dollars to be increased. The city
Yes.
clerk explained today that they have not been increased. And he shared a little bit about how he's increased those numbers over the last couple years already from, was it 60 to 150? And at this point, he's keeping them the same.
All
So
right.
he left us. He wasn't happy. No, I'm just kidding.
Hopefully he'll be happy. Maybe the city clerk can follow up with him offline.
I will.
Okay, so
I'm just teasing. Sorry.
City Clerk, can you go ahead and call the vote?
Yes, Commissioner Lanier,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Connor,
Yes.
Commissioner Moody, Commissioner Moody, can you hear me?
It's like he's having technical difficulties.
All right, so City Clerk, there he is.
Commissioner Moody,
So Commissioner, we're voting on that item now, and the City Clerk is calling the vote. And this is the resolution about the polling locations.
Commissioner, we can see you. Maybe you can nod.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Isasi,
Yes.
Commissioner Repart.
I heard him mouth yes, but Commissioner Repart, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you. No, your volume's not working.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Commissioner Moody. But we still can't hear Commissioner Repart. Does a head shake do, City Clerk?
That will suffice.
Okay.
Commissioner Repart votes yes. There.
You call for me?
And Mayor Bliss.
Yes, it carries. Okay, hopefully these next few resolutions. Commissioner Repart, did you get your volume figured out? No, we still can't hear you.
Can we get them to?
There you go.
There we go.
All right, there we go.
All right, great, thanks. Hopefully we've worked out the technical difficulties for the rest of the morning. Again, not ideal. Hopefully we'll be back together face to face soon. Next resolution is approving an amendment to the land bank agreement with the State Land Bank Authority. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. And I believe Mr. Gracia is going to tell us about this.
Yes, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. So what's before you is an amendment to the land bank agreement between the city of Grand Rapids and the state land bank that encompass 61 properties across the city. The amendment is simply to clean up a discrepancy between the maintenance payments from quarterly as opposed to annual. And again, adds those 61 properties under the maintenance of the state land bank. They will be maintaining these properties, and it's important to maintain for the maintenance of these properties so that as we work through the Housing Next strategy that is authorized by the City Commission, it will put these properties in a better position moving forward. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gracia. Commissioners, any questions about that? Commissioner Lanier?
I have a quick one. Mayor, I think during our budget discussion, I think it was you that asked for an update on the relationship from the city and the state land bank. And I know we kind of briefly talked about that during budget. And I'm curious if we can have a more robust discussion about what that relationship is going to look like or looks like right now. In some ways, I feel like we kind of transitioned from the county land bank to the state land bank without there really being a full discussion about what it entails, what the differences are, and how this will unfold. And I know there were a number of people probably a year ago asking about some of the elements of the land bank and our relationship with the land bank. So if that's possible soon to have, it doesn't impact this decision today, but if we can do that as quickly as possible, that would be great.
And then also after our last discussion, I have followed up with some of our state representatives that they're still trying to push forward legislation that would allow us to establish our own Grand Rapids land bank. So we're still actively working to get that legislation in place so that we can hopefully have our own land bank, knowing that we want to be more closely engaged in leading that work, especially moving forward. I think it's going to be important. So thank you.
That's a good point. So Mayor, I'm curious to know if the contract that we have with the state land bank, in the event that they do make a legislative change, will we immediately be able to transition into, having our own land bank, or will we be confined to a contract that wouldn't allow that to take place as quickly as we may want?
Yeah, no, that would be up to this body. So we would be under the proposed legislation. We would be the ones to establish a land bank, and then we would probably want some lead time to get that structure in place and the capacity, and then we would have a thoughtful transition back. So
yes, Commissioner Lanier, my understanding is we can acquire that property at any time as well with a new agreement. So
yeah, thank you, Mr. Gracia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other final questions? All right, City Clerk, you want to call the question or call the vote on this?
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Connor,
Yes.
Commissioner Moody,
Yes.
Commissioner Isasi,
Yes.
Commissioner Repart,
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier,
Yes.
Mayor Bliss.
Yes.
Yay. Got a good vote.
Yeah. All right. So next, commissioners, is a resolution considering zoning ordinance text amendments relative to payment for excess parking. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right.
Support.
Moved and supported. And we have Ms. Turkelson here to tell us about this.
Mr. Hondorp, could you please add Turkelson as a panelist, please?
She is.
Okay. Are you ready, Kristen?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Commission. I apologize. I'm multitasking for my child here for a broken foot. Anyways, so this next item is a zoning amendment relative to the zoning ordinance. And we overhauled the zoning requirements for downtown parking. And with that, we implemented a mechanism to try to support some publicly available parking. However, after a few examples, we realized that both from a business sense of the individual businesses that are looking to make investments in the downtown, we realized that perhaps this specific requirement is a little bit ahead of its time, and that some additional work is going and discussion is needed. So we are recommending that we eliminate the parking fee requirement associated with this recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any questions about that? Pretty straightforward. Okay. All right, City Clerk, will you call the vote?
Commissioner O'Connor,
Yes.
Commissioner Moody,
Yes.
Commissioner Isasi,
Yes.
Commissioner, okay, sorry, Commissioner Repart,
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Bliss.
Yes, it carries. Thank you. And then our next item is a resolution authorizing the planning department to approve contracts and disbursements totaling $100,000 for the master plan neighborhood facilitator program from funds budgeted from the master plan. Motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. And Ms. Turkelson, sorry to hear about your little one. Thank you for still joining us while you're dealing with that. So if you want to just.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. And we'll try to do this as quickly as possible. Why don't you tell us about this item?
Nope, that's okay. I'm all set. Okay, so this item is actually part of our master planning scoping that we presented to you back in, I believe it was March. And you may recall that one of the efforts we wanted to do was to hire neighborhood facilitators to go out and review the current master plan and any applicable area-specific plans and really help us understand what's working, what's not working, what areas or focus do we need to look at as part of the new master plan update. And so this is a request to disperse the funds necessary for each individual contract. And we're quite pleased with the interest from the community. And I think we have a good representation throughout the community and good ward distribution for these neighborhood facilitators.
Thank you. All right, Commissioners, any questions about that? All right, seeing none. City Clerk, you want to call the vote?
Commissioner Moody,
Yes.
Commissioner Isasi,
Yes.
Commissioner Repart,
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Connor,
Yes.
Mayor Bliss.
Yes, it carries. All right, thank you, Commissioners. That takes us through our action items. So I'm going to head back up to the top. I know I know all of you are well aware of this, that it's been a really challenging last several days in our city. So we have a lot of updates to get through this morning. Similar to weeks in the past, I want to start with a COVID update because even though we are also dealing with the civil emergency that was put in place based on the violence that occurred on Saturday night, we also are still trying to mitigate the spread of COVID and work with community as we're all navigating the pandemic. So what I'd like to do is provide the city manager an opportunity to update us on COVID. The governor did come out yesterday with some updates, and then he and our chief will update us on the state of the city, I guess was the best word to use, the state of the city and where we are with the declaration of emergency and what some of the recommendations are from the city manager and the chief. And then we'll be given an opportunity to ask questions and weigh in and share our thoughts. Turn it over to the city manager, and I'm going to put myself on mute to make sure I don't have interference since we're just office away from each other. So, city manager, I'll turn it to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And Commissioners, I apologize for not having gotten the briefing to you sooner, but we were working on this well into the night and even moments before our briefing today, as this is pretty fluid. So as the mayor said, we'd like to give an update on both COVID and our public safety response to some of the recent incidents that have occurred since Saturday. So I'm going to ask a few of the staff to join me. First of all, before we do that, before we do that, Mr. Kane, thank you. Before we do that, I want to express my appreciation to the staff for the tremendous amount of work that they have been doing over the past few days, co-managing two emergencies, one related to public health, the other related to public safety, and many of the people have been involved in both. I also want to thank the public for their work in helping us in both instances. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the recent sensitivities around public safety. But I'll begin with the COVID briefing. And if we can have the slides brought up, I'll ask our emergency manager, Ms. Farrell, to begin with a few situational updates on where we are with COVID and reopening. And then we'll talk about reentry and some of our social zones.
All right, thank you, City Manager. Good morning, Mayor Bliss and Commissioners. Asante, thank you. Yeah, so unfortunately, we have two incidents, two EOCs going at this point. So we still are dealing with COVID. This first slide, as we've been sharing for the last few weeks in regards to COVID, gives a snapshot of just a general idea of how COVID is impacting the United States as a whole. We are currently over at 1 million, over 1,700,000 cases, total cases of COVID since earlier this year, and over 104,000 deaths across the United States. You can go ahead and thank you. So as far as the state of Michigan goes and Kent County, as we've been sharing, Kent County Health Department has a wonderful dashboard that's available that really shows the breakdown of the demographics of the impacts on our community. We currently, as you can see, over 3,700 cases in the county and the city. One thing to keep in mind, as far as out of that total, we have, as far as active cases go for the county and the city, we're at 1,530 active cases, and we've had 2,129 recovered cases. So our recovered numbers for the county and the city have surpassed the number of active cases, which is a positive with that. And, we're still monitoring, still liaising with the health department. Right now, their big focus is really expanding the testing opportunities for our community, and we're seeing an increase of those testing opportunities come out hopefully by the end of this week. And with that, that's our update as far as COVID goes. I'm going to turn it back over to City Manager Mark Washington for the rest of what we're doing with COVID. Thank you.
Okay, just real briefly, as the mayor said, the governor has allowed the reopening of our economy to proceed to the next phase, phase 4, and we'll have retail that will be available without appointments starting on the 4th, and restaurants with dining capabilities, half of their seating capacity, as long as they have good social distancing. It's good news right in time for summer as we have an opportunity to reopen some of the camps for our children, our pools, and some of the amenities. We're a little challenged with the short notice because, as you're aware previously, we didn't anticipate that happening in the budget. So we de-staffed for pools, and we are going to be challenged as to being ready on the 8th. And so we are not in a position to give a more timely update. To give an update today, we'll come back and update you later on in the week after we've done more planning. This is all recent while we were managing the other emergency. So the governor has also permitted fitness classes to occur, as well as athletics, outdoors, and games. And so that will be something we'll have to talk about, how we are able to accommodate that, not only for businesses, but also in our facilities. And the limitation on size of gatherings. This is very important because it affects the other emergency that we're managing in terms of gatherings of no more than 100 people, where we know the demonstrations that we've had recently have far exceeded that number. And there are other amenities, other services that are allowed, such as cleaning in home, but there are other that remain closed, such as indoor movie theaters. I think outdoor movie theaters are permitted, indoor gyms and other recreational activities, as well as the hair and salon issues, salon services. Next slide. So we've been working with departments for a long time, ramping for reentry. We've started having employees come back to City Hall and other services this week. None of our services have been closed. We've just had employees working remotely, and so we're beginning to have more on-site staffing, and we're doing the appropriate notifications in the buildings. You'll see those markings when you enter the buildings. We've had several town hall meetings, virtual town hall meetings with staff, and we've been putting protocols in place to do the temperature checks and observations and recordings as part of the Kent County Back to Work program. And again, we're considering how to reopen some of our communities. I want to ask Mr. Canfield if he can give us an update on our social zones. Everything seems good to go. We were ahead of many of those here in the country around our state, rather, around permitting some outdoor activity to expand seating capacity. And so, Mr. Canfield, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, City Manager Washington. And good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. This slide shows some of the recently completed activities by the Outdoor Space Activation Working Group, which is underneath the Economic Resiliency and Recovery Group of the EOC. So as you're well aware, you approved an authorizing resolution for social zones on May 21st. So at your special meeting the Thursday before last. Social zones, just as a quick reminder, are shared outdoor seating areas. Think of them as like a food court or a dining plaza on city property or right of way. So you authorized those, and staff completed and published an online outdoor activation and social zones guide, which you can find online by searching any of those terms. That was live the middle of last week. We now have a special events fast app available online for coordinating organizations to submit applications for these zones on behalf of a group of businesses. We've held introductory meetings with corridor improvement authorities, business associations, et cetera. We had one last Wednesday afternoon and another last Thursday afternoon to explain and get them started planning on what they'd like to do. We are going to be, so this slide says plan here, the second to last bullet, but we actually are going to waive special event permit and barricading fees for the zones, as well as temporary use permit fees for outdoor seating. And that will be done through an upcoming administrative order by the city manager. And we also have been doing a considerable amount of promoting of these zones through social media, traditional media, et cetera. So that's what we've done in the last week and a half. Next slide, please. What we have in progress right now, we are continuing to identify and work with coordinating organizations who will be applying for these permits. We're continuing to promote the social zone concept and explain the process. We're developing an equipment rental cost reduction framework. So think of tables and chairs that special events has in inventory. We're not thinking those will be provided at zero cost because we do want to encourage people to use the equipment they have. So we're imagining a reduced rate that would gradually phase out for those kinds of equipment. And then we're continuing to monitor and advocate for state legislation, especially related to alcohol service in the zones.
All right. Next slide, please. So, can you hear? Okay, thank you. So I want to shift the presentation a little bit and talk about our public safety update. And Before I get into the content, I want to begin by saying we were all appalled, both across the nation and our community, about the horrific images that we saw with the suffocation and the murder of George Floyd while lying on the ground with a knee of a law enforcement officer on his neck. That discusses me, it discusses our chief, as well as many of the men and women in our police department, and obviously the people who are in our community. It is so deplorable that it is traumatizing, and it reminds us all of the many images that we've seen around unjust use of force in the likeness of Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, Walter Scott, and so many others who have been unjustifiably killed. And so we, along with many people in this community, understand the need to be sensitive to those concerns, and Black Lives Matter. And yes, Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to say it beyond Black Lives Matter. As a Black person, a Black male, my life matters. And so we are sensitive to that. At the same time, while being sensitive to that and trying to ensure nonviolence against innocent people, I believe in nonviolence against all people, to include our police officers and other people who are not African American. We want a very peaceful community. We know historically that the violence has disproportionately affected African Americans in our community, as well as throughout the country, with either policing issues or just public health issues, or just intra-cultural issues in terms of Black on Black crimes. And we are sensitive to all that, and we want to change the systems that contribute to those unjust outcomes. In doing so, at the same time, we have to make sure that we are not perpetuating violence that further harms our community or continues to keep members of our community who can least afford to be impacted by violence due to what is peaceful, starts off as peaceful protesting, that turns into co-op violent takeovers. What we've seen across the nation is civil unrest, and there are over 200 cities and counting where these demonstrations occur. That's just what we're able to gather. I'm sure that there are many that are unreported. And what we've ascertained, that at least 40 communities or more have curfews in place, major cities. We know that here in our own state that we have a curfew, as well as Detroit and Lansing. And because of all that, and what's recently occurred, our Emergency Operations Center has changed from managing COVID to now making sure that we can maintain law and order in our community. We have, with the riots that happened on this past Saturday, where we had over 100 businesses that were damaged, and and over 30 arrests, due to either riots or curfews. We know that has also inflicted harm in our community. And our concern is not just about property damage. And I've heard people say that. It goes beyond the property damage. It's the damage to our psyche. It's the damage to our morale. It's the damage to economic resources that people of color depend on too, not just the owners of those businesses. It's damaging. And so we have physical damage, and we also have some social damage. And we know that it's going to take a while to clean up. We had a great cleanup activity the day after, but that was just what was on the ground. And we know we still have debris to work through. And we're going to try to do some of that even in our briefing today. Because of that, there has been a curfew that has been put in place on the 31st at 7 p.m. and every morning is expired at 5 a.m. And that has helped us to restore some sense of order in our community. And unlike other cities that have had many, many nights and counting of rioting and violence, we were able to acknowledge it, hear it, stop it, and hopefully do things to prevent it from occurring. That curfew is a mitigation effort. It is not punishment. It is mitigation to help us just to maintain this, and not so much that we don't trust the people in Grand Rapids. We don't trust our own community. We understand that there are people that are infiltrating our community that are disguising under the mask of peace and coming to cause mayhem. And so that curfew has helped us to manage that. And so has the resources that we receive from the county, Ottawa County, Kent County, the sheriffs, both of those, sheriff's office, Kentwood, Wyoming, Walker, and the state, as well as the National Guard. And we did not bring in the National Guard to do any arrests. As a matter of fact, the National Guard has not participated in one single arrest. They have helped us to maintain a presence and security, which we were unable to do on Saturday. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we think that there are some recommendations we would like the commission to consider in helping us to continue to manage this ongoing public safety emergency. We appreciate the support of the National Guards. They have helped us, as well as all those other resources, maintain law and order. And because of that, they're now assessing their demobilization. We've had a chance to talk to the Colonel, Major General, and their chain of command. They have been great in supporting, and they now see that things are under control, that law and order has been reestablished. They will begin demobilizing today. If nothing else happens that we're unable to manage. We do want to maintain our ability to recall them as a resource if need be, but hopefully that will not be needed. We are asking that you continue to keep the curfew in place through June the 7th. And the reason why we want to do that is for a couple of reasons. We're still in, we talked about recovery on the economic recovery for COVID, but we're also in recovery for some of the same businesses who have been damaged, who now need to do more than put boards up, but they need to have some repair work going on. And the repair work needs to be occurring in not being in conflict with other demonstrations, and that repair work may need to even happen overnight, all in evening hours. And so we just don't want to have too many things to manage at once, to be quite honest. This is becoming very unmanageable for the staff to manage recovery operations for COVID, recovery operations for now the rioting, and we just have a lot of things going on, and we need to compartmentalize as much as we can. We're trying to reopen on the 8th, and we're trying to yet to maintain law and order. And we know that there are people that, even though our city has been very calm, that these riots are, it too, just like COVID's a virus, racism is a virus. Some of these riots are also viral and viruses. And so we need all the tools that we can gain to manage this. And so what we would ask is your consideration, since the curfew has expired this morning, either to maintain it at 7 or to allow it to go to 8:30. That still gives us another hour of daylight to manage people who are past the curfew and ensure their safe compliance and return home before it gets too dark. Once things get dark, and what we've seen in other communities, they become even more unmanageable. We want to continue to rely on the resources from the state police and other law enforcement agencies as they are needed and as they are available. And what we're seeing now is as other communities around us start to experience their own issues, what resources they may have had on loan or available to us may not always be as accessible as we would like. Next slide. So we've also talked about not only just how do we respond to some of the public safety response issues, but how do we really deal with policy issues to help improve community relations? How do we go beyond just demonstrations and phrases to begin to have good policy reform and change? Because I think that is the reason for the anxiety, that is the reason for the frustration, that people want to see something differently, something happen that's different. And we are in a different position than other communities because right now they are literally still fighting fires. And it was fortuitous that we had an opportunity to come in the middle of this and had a scheduled meeting where we can discuss some serious policy issues. And so these are some of the policy things that we have in our time of just responding. We have also been engaging members of the community. I've had several conversations with pastors, with organizations personally. I've talked to Clee Jackson from the NAACP, talked to Jeremy DeRue from Link Up. I've talked to members from the Urban League. Obviously, I don't have to go too far to have that conversation, but also talked to pastors from other leading congregations in the community, as well as other members from the Hispanic Center and just lots of other community-based organizations, as well as have dispatched our offices that we have designed, that we intentionally designed to be community connected. Our Office of Oversight and Accountability, as well as our Equity Office, to have further conversations with community about some of the things we want to consider. And we want to lay some of these things out that we think are important for us to begin as a governing body talking about aspirational things that we'd like to see, as well as a process to listen to community, hear their voice, and further build upon some of the suggestions that we've heard and we're relaying back here today. So with that, I'm going to ask now Mr. Brandon Davis to talk about some of these things that we should consider that will help us improve community and police relations. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good morning, everyone. So the things that we are considering for improving community police relations include the following. Chief Ping will be kneeling and participating and working in solidarity with those that are in the march on June 3rd. And we want to make sure that we allow individuals to safely express their feelings. So we'll be working collaboratively to help that occur. Chief Payne, along with my office, will work together to establish a community police advisory council. And the commitment is to do that by June 6th. And this is an opportunity for us to really look at policy and for us to have community voice elevated as we make those important decisions. The city manager, the police chief, the Office of Oversight, and the Equity and Engagement Office will host an initial virtual town hall. And the purpose of this town hall is for us to listen to community concern and to seek innovative solutions for how we move forward after this incident and to repair relationships. OPA will also increase accountability, and the way we'll do that is by reviewing and releasing a comprehensive report and recommendations related to the status of all of the prior work that has been done. And we recognize that work has been done in this area by our community, and we've benefited greatly from community voice. And there's been studies and there's been task force that have occurred. And we want to take all of those things, look at those recommendations, look at what those commitments have been, and release a report about where we stand now and recommendations about how we accomplish those things. Additionally, the Office of Oversight, along with the Office of Equity and Engagement, will host events led by psychiatrists and therapists and psychologists, so subject matter experts regarding processing and healing from trauma and vicarious trauma related to racism and use of force, because we have to recognize that those feelings are real and that outrage is real and that trauma is real. Next slide, please. In addition to that, the Office of Equity and Engagement, along with Oversight and Public Accountability and Economic Development, will work together with the business community to increase summer job opportunities for youth, because we know that those opportunities are necessary and they help us to mend and to heal. OPA will work to create a safety and accountability ambassador program. And it's important that we note that safety and accountability are not mutually exclusive concepts. They are both important. And we'll be working with community to create a program to where we give the tools to individuals and community to help us promote safety and accountability as we move forward. OPA and the Office of Equity and Engagement will also host training sessions regarding being an ally in partnership with community. That's something we're continuing to hear. How do I help? I believe in this, but what do I do? And we want to provide that assistance as a city to community on what we do to be allies and how we do that effectively. In addition, OPA will also work with community to review the police department policies and practices with a focus on equity and innovation. And we know that reviewing is not enough. There needs to be action. There has to be real change. So as a result of that review, we will also recommend improvements. The Office of Equity and Engagement will increase and enhance training related to equity, justice, implicit bias, and other related topics for city staff to make sure that our staff is equipped as we work and serve in community. And OPA will also complete the strategic plan that we've already begun to talk to you and community about, and we'll implement additional strategies to increase restorative justice programming, elevate community voice, and public safety engagement. And that's part of what we'll be doing to improve community and police relations. Mr. Washington, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Can we take the slides down, please, at this point? And so this is in addition to the things we all have already done in terms of transparency with the body cam video and making things accessible, with our reform to our human rights ordinance on biased crime reporting, with our reform, along with our reform on our immigration policy, along with establishing and creating a second shift of community policing officers. I mean, these are things that we are continuing to do while sustaining all of the good work that has already been done by our officers. And I want to commend our officers for their performance under very, very difficult circumstances. Not only the law enforcement from Grand Rapids Police Department, but the many, many other officers that were there in assisting, and the amount of restraint and the amount of discipline that they use under very difficult situations, and having worked in some cases 20 hours. And we know that fatigue, your decision-making quality tends to decrease with fatigue. And I saw several examples of officers exhibiting far more patience than I could have ever utilized in those difficult situations. And so I want to thank them for their courage and bravery, and not only them, for our fire department as well. And what I would like to do now, before turning it back over to the mayor, is to have both of our police chiefs come and share their insights and their thoughts on the performance, on the situation the experience from their perspective and how they feel about what has been discussed today, as well as the state of their department. And so I'll start with Chief Payne, and then will add Chief Lehman. We'll have Chief Lehman come on. Chief Payne.
Thank you, City Manager, and thanks, Mayor, Commissioners, for having me this morning. There's a number of things that have been outlined. We are committed to participating and being a part of them, leading those initiatives. Ultimately, what we want is peace. The city manager mentioned that it has been challenging, but we are here committed to keeping the city safe, keeping our officers as their number one priority is safety of the community. And I'd like to say, and I've mentioned this before, law enforcement has to look themselves in the eye. This is an incident that happened in Minnesota. We have to be cognizant of what the community is saying. And I want to say, I hear you, and I've been hearing you. I've been experiencing this for over 30 years. I'm in a position now to make the changes that need to be done. I hope other law enforcement throughout the country is hearing what is being said, and they're willing to work with the community to make those communities, everyone's community, safe. So Black Lives Matter. We will continue to work with the community. And by working together, we can build a stronger community than what we had before, where everyone feels safe. The status of the department, our officers, we're trying to make sure they are rested. It was very trying. There were officers that did work up to 20 hours on Saturday. And then we asked them to come back the following day. We're doing our best to make sure we're keeping them fresh, and that I'd just like to say thank you to them. And as the manager mentioned, we've had a lot of resources brought in from many different police agencies to assist us. So thank you to everyone out there.
And I want to commend the police chief as well. Even on Saturday night, the chief did attempt to address the crowd, and because of the large number of people that were gathered and pressed against the building, and the way the event was planned or unplanned, not planned, he was not able to obviously speak and for the crowd to hear him. So he attempted to address the crowd on Saturday to de-escalate those events. And he also attempted some attempt yesterday. And so I think what we have is a chief that is willing to make himself available to the community and to work with the community and to try to have positive change and reform, and as we want this to be one of the safest community in the country. I'm going to now shift a little bit, and I want to ask Chief Lehman if he's on, if he'll come on now. And doing the activities, I had a chance one night I spent riding around with Chief Payne, and another night with Chief Lehman, and the mayor was able to accompany me on both of those nights. And I want to thank Chief Lehman for his work and the men and women of his department, the bravery that they exhibited in very, very difficult circumstances. We are going to now, he's going to increase his equipment supply to have more other equipment that they need to respond to fires. Now, him and Axel, I want to thank Axel too for accompanying us. So with that, Chief Lehman.
Thank you. I just want to say I don't underestimate or undervalue the conversations that are happening in our community right now. And I also acknowledge that I hear this, I have heard this. We've been parts of these conversations for a while, but I appreciate the level of anxiety and frustration within the community around the topic. I want to say that from the fire department's perspective, this event we planned for. Chief Payne and I had multiple conversations. In fact, we've been talking about the potential for civil disturbance, although in a different arena and under a different topic for a couple months now. And as we've been going through COVID, we were having those behind the scenes conversations with his command staff and my command staff about the potential for civil disturbance around the fact that we have a number of people out of work. We have a number of people that aren't able to feed their families, and a number of people that have been pent up with anxiety in the household. But that's not where this ended up creating a civil disturbance. It ended up with this area that we're talking about now. I want to tell you that we were prepared to a level that as we looked across the country and studied, what was happening in other places, we staffed accordingly at the fire department. And I believe that the police, from what I understand, and Chief Payne can talk to that specifically, staffed their department to a level that we felt was appropriate for what we had intelligence on at the time. We are not. This is not something that on a emergency response level that we are used to. It hasn't happened for 30, 40 years in our communities for us to be able to have the experience level to respond. But we have studied this. We have policies in place on civil disturbance, and we were able to utilize those policies for some guidelines. Our members relied heavily on the police department to be able to respond in a safe manner. The community or the people that were out there during the civil disturbance that were taking actions against the police and the fire department on the front lines were doing so in a way that we are not used to responding to, and literally putting our firefighters in a position where great bodily harm could have come. And I am so grateful that nobody got hurt or killed as a result of that, either on the protesters' part or on the responders' part. I think the potential was and still is very high for us to sustain damage within the city. And I think that we need to make sure that we are taking the measures, appropriate measures, to make sure that we're staffing and that we're keeping our kind of lines of communication open, trying to deal with this incident in a very deliberate way on a conversation end, but also planning for those people that are not necessarily have the best interests of our community at mind and are here for other reasons. So I just want to say that our firefighters always have the mindset that we're here to serve the community. We are, they have the perspective of understanding that their tensions are high. People have been pent up in their houses for a long time, and that this is a kind of a way that maybe some people are letting those kind of levels of frustration out that wouldn't normally happen in another case. So appreciate the fact that as we watch this on a national level, that this is not a Grand Rapids issue, and that we stand here to be able to support our community in every way possible, but also to be able to respond and protect our community in every way possible.
Thank you, Chief. Mayor, with that, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions that you might have of us.
All right. Thank you, City Manager. So I want to say a few things, and then I'm going to turn it to my colleagues to ask questions either about COVID or about how best we move forward. So a couple things I want to say, having spent a significant amount of time these past couple days with the Emergency Operating Center team, our city manager, and both chiefs. I want to thank them for their work, as well as Brandon Davis. Also want to really thank Brandon Davis and Stacy Stout, who have been working hard to bring forward some tangible and meaningful.
Mayor, we lost you. Can you repeat that again? We urge you thanking Brandon and Stacy Stout.
Thank you. And so I want to thank Brandon Davis and Stacy Stout. I know they have worked really hard to bring forward the recommendations that we have today. And like many of you, I've had a lot of conversations with individuals throughout our community as they have. And I think many of these recommendations are capturing some of the ideas that we're hearing from community leaders. So I want to thank them for that. I also want to say that we as a body, we have been talking about acknowledging and recognizing the deep racial disparities that exist in our city for years, and we know that there is a lot of work to be done, and I am grateful for some of the work that we have done. Clearly, there is a lot more to do. And I think the question for me that I've been wrestling with a lot of questions, as you can imagine, but it's really how do we channel this anger and frustration that exists throughout our community and throughout communities everywhere into real meaningful change and action. I think that is the task before us. And how do we do that in a way where we continue to create safe spaces where people can come together and lift up their voice and grieve together and cry together and express their anger together, but also do it in a place that is safe and where they don't have to be worried that violence is gonna erupt. So it's a tall task before us, but I know that we can get there together, not just as an elected body, but with our city leadership team and all of the community members that are eager and willing to work with us to move forward. I think Brandon Davis is absolutely right. All of us have heard from people saying, how can I help? What can I do? And I think we need to create a path for people to really get engaged in a meaningful way and dig deep and find a way to be a part of the solution, really moving Grand Rapids to a more just and equitable future. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to all of you to ask questions. I'm sure you have many of them. And so I will mute my microphone and look for the hands to be raised to call on each of you to ask your questions and to share your own thoughts and wisdom and ideas with everyone this morning. So Commissioner Repart, I'll start with you. And then I'll go Commissioner Repart to Commissioner Asasi to Commissioner Moody. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me now? I'm gonna make sure my mic's on. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Good.
I'm sorry to butt in a second. Can I just ask a point of order question?
Sure.
Are we going to first, I would make the suggestion, can we first talk about social zones? I have questions about that, and I want to make sure that we can talk about what happened over the weekend separately, but I would make that recommendation. If any of us have questions about social zones, can we do that first and then move to this important conversation as well?
Yes, Commissioner, that's actually a great recommendation. So let's maybe talk about COVID, social zones, reopening. I know I've had questions about the permit process to make sure that that's streamlined now that we have a date for reopening. So thank you for making that recommendation. If I have support, if I can see some head shakes, if we can take the presentation separately, and let's first ask questions specific to the COVID update and the reopening and the social zones. And I'll start with you, Commissioner Asas. Unless Commissioner Park, did you have a question about that?
No, mine is about the events of the weekend.
Okay, so why don't we start with that, and then as soon as those questions are taken care of, then we'll move to the next topic. So, Commissioner Asasi, you want to start, and then I see Commissioner Lanier's hand up.
Thank you, colleagues, for doing that. I just have a couple of questions in lieu. I recognize this might be something that would be forthcoming. I think the website was very well done. I sent many people to the website that highlighted the process. But I do have a couple of things I want to continue to point out. As we look for these social zones, I think it's really important to make sure we continue to center our pedestrians during this time as we look and make sure, I'd asked a question the last time about the safety plan as it related to the fire department being able to access if something, did happen. But I want to, we do all this work to make sure our pedestrians are safe in our crosswalks. I also want to make that sure in any plan like this, as well as making sure it's accessible to individuals who might have different abilities and might have different mobility needs. So I think that's something that we should continue to look for in these social zones. I know you mentioned business associations. So my question, have all the CIAs, I know we're on CIAs, but I know we had some updates, but I think some further connection with them would be good. I know I've had a couple of neighborhood associations ask me about their role in this. I don't know if the intention is after applications are submitted, then would we go to different bodies to seek that input before that process would move forward. And then I know today in fiscal, we talked a bit about some of the signage for reopening. So I don't know if there's any updates about projected or estimated total costs associated with social zones. I know we have some of you talked about the fees under the administrative order. So thank you for that update. So those are my updates and questions around social zones.
So Mayor, if I could, I'm going to ask Mr. Canfield to address some of those. I want to just weigh in on the last one. I neglected, my apologies, in the update on COVID and recovery to provide a status on our request for support from the county for CARES funding. And as you can recall, based on the communications I sent to this body, as well as what was shared with the county, we had submitted a request of 37 million. They are meeting this morning. And my understanding is that they've looked at our request. They have seen what was areas of duplicated areas, whether it was business assistance or housing assistance. And as I understand it, that is now been narrowed down to a little over $11 million of consideration for Grand Rapids to assist in recovery. I will have to find out if what portion of that can be used for the social zone. So I neglected to give that update, but they're deliberating that this morning as we speak and have not. I'm not aware of the outcomes. Perhaps after Mr. Canfield gives an update, Ms. Claren can come on and advise where they're on that, because I know she's been monitored. Mr. Canfield?
Yes. All right, I will respond to your questions, Commissioner, in the order you asked them. So as far as the design of social zones and ensuring pedestrian access and safety and barrier-free facilities, the city will have, and I'm actually training city staff on how to perform the reviews this afternoon, but the city will have traffic safety, police, fire, and others represented in the review process for these zones. So those concerns will be raised if there are any potential issues with the design. They'll be raised and addressed during the review process. But please be assured, we're not going to walk away from any of those important concerns with social zones. I do want to say social zones are not going to look like the kind of permanent infrastructure we're used to. And so, there may be an impression of, oh, this is a temporary barrier, and maybe that's not as good as something that's, designed by an engineer and built just for this exact location. So I do think we have to be prepared for people to encounter things that look more temporary than they're used to. And I think that's just part of the nature of coping with this situation. You asked about corridor improvement authorities, and I mentioned that we did have a meeting with the corridor improvement authorities, not in their entirety, but with representatives of each. That was I believe it was last Wednesday. And we are hoping that some of them will step forward and want to serve as the coordinating organization for social zones, in which case they would coordinate the proposal. So the proposed layout and timing and all that. So we do hope they will be willing to play that role. And then as far as the cost of the social zones, we think that's going to be approximately $10,000 in lost revenue. Could be a little more, could be a little less. It depends on how many there are, which we're not sure of yet, and how long they last, which we're not sure of yet. So it's a bit of a moving target, but it's basically lost revenue. We wouldn't be charging fees that we would for these things under ordinary circumstances.
Thanks, Lou.
Sure.
All right, I think I saw Commissioner Lanier, you have some questions?
I do. Commissioner Isasi asked a few of them. I didn't hear if you shared a response regarding the neighborhood associations. I too have heard from neighborhood associations about their involvement. And I think they wanted to kind of weigh in weigh in the design and the development on that end, but it sounds like where you're seeking input is probably on the areas that may be defined as a social zone, and at that point, gathering input. So I'm curious to know what methodology will be used for engaging neighborhood associations. And then you mentioned that the cost is about 10,000 in loss of revenue. So I'm curious to know if that is for all of them or if that's per zone that is implemented. And then my other question is tied to the results that we're seeing with COVID cases. The governor has, on a few different occasions, mentioned Grand Rapids as she's giving her press conferences and her concern for what's happening in Grand Rapids and the cases. And as you were going through your slides and we were looking at the county of Kent, we can see that we have not, I don't know if plateau is the word that's been used, but the curve has not leveled off and started this downward, starting in a downward direction. So I'm also curious, we're kind of in this odd place where it could be a lot of the efforts that are going into increasing testing and making sure that we're testing people. And as a result of that, the numbers aren't necessarily decreasing. And because they aren't decreasing, we know that COVID is still live and thriving, unfortunately, in our city. And so I'd like to know, what other precautions, as the governor is trying to reopen the state, what other precautions are we going to put into place to make sure that we can at least get to a plateau state and downward direction before we just kind of open up, as she's trying to do across other communities in Michigan that may be on a different side of the curve than we are.
Let's start with, I'm going to ask everybody to put it on mute if you're not. Let's start with the last, and then we'll go back to the social zone, since the premise of some of your questions was around the data. I'm not sure the slide that we used is the one to show the trend on new cases. I think that was total confirmed cases. We'll need to get a data set to show the new cases, because I thought I did see a slide showing that there was a slightward bend of the trend in our county. It was our region that I believe that was holistically looked at. And I want to ask Ms. Farrell, are you on can you turn your camera on, Ms. Farrell?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, so the slide that we showed is not the slides of new cases. Those are total cases for our county, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Can we come back? If you don't have it, can we come back and talk about what is the trend, not for our region, because I think that's what the governor has been referencing, but for Kent County. And I think our health department director has said the data in our county is much improved over what we're being categorized regionally. Is that accurate?
That is correct. So on the Kent County dashboard, there's 4 pages on it, so you can scroll through. On the second page of that dashboard, it shows a new confirmed a graph with new confirmed cases, and then
can you share your screen? Are you looking at it?
I don't have the capability.
That's okay.
Okay, but it's really been this kind of a wave effect, and I'll make sure that all the commissioners get a copy of this. But right now we're on a downward trend over the last 3 days. And so actually it looks like I just got capability. Let me see if I can do this real quick. But let's do this. All right. Can you let me know if you see that? Okay.
Yes.
So right here, down here on the bottom right there, this is the second page of the Kent County dashboard. And you'll see that this has been since beginning of March, us tracking the number of cases. So in the last 24 hours, we increased by 33 cases. And then the day before, we increased by 73. So it's been this up and down trend, and for the health department, this has been due to increased testing in a variety of pockets of our community between long-term care facilities, any other type of congregate housing, our homeless population, and also any hotspots they were seeing at any businesses, industrial businesses in the county and the city. So so this really kind of gives that visual of what's happening when it comes to the county and the city as a whole. Back to your point, city manager, when the governor does talk about Grand Rapids, that is really, it's more than just the city of Grand Rapids and Kent County. It's multiple jurisdictions involved in that discussion. So.
Okay, and what we'll do is we'll make sure that we start showing the area data. But I think one of the things that is a concern is, given the size of these large gatherings that we've had without people being exercising appropriate physical distance, those are risk factors that could affect the outcome of our infections. So, Mr. Canfield, you want to continue the question about safety within the social zone?
Sure, yes. So, Commissioner, you asked about neighborhood associations and their involvement. And I think you raise a good point that we want to make sure that whatever the coordinating organization is, if it's not if it's not the neighborhood organization itself, that they first of all connect with the neighborhood association. So that's something that we can add to our process. Is not only do they need to check with adjacent property owners and businesses and those whose access might be affected, but also check in with the neighborhood association. I think we can do that in a pretty straightforward manner. Another possibility is we're intending to have a pre-application meeting between city staff and the coordinating organization, and so we'll consider it might be appropriate to invite the neighborhood association to that meeting, that pre-application meeting, so they can provide some input. So we'll give that some more thought. And then as far as the estimate is concerned, that's our best estimate for all of the zones, not per zone. But please keep in mind, it's kind of a midpoint, and the number will almost certainly vary from that. It's just our best estimate as of now.
Thank you for that. And I think it is a good idea to invite the neighborhood associations for the pre-application meeting, because oftentimes there are business districts that may not have an official business association. And so the neighborhood association kind of serves as a dual role, making sure that the business district is kept abreast of changes that the city is making. So I think that would be wise to include them, especially if there's a district that doesn't have a business district or a SID. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, any other questions related to the COVID response, reopening, or social zones? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to our second really important topic. And I will start with Commissioner Repart, and then I know Commissioner Asasi had a question, and then I'll go to Commissioner Moody, and then I'll see who else wants to speak. But that will be how we will start. So Commissioner Repart.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, City Manager, and your whole team for working late into the night to make the plans that you've made. I too want to center my comments this morning in the acknowledgement of the life of George Floyd and his tragic death, as well as the events of this past week and weekend. While the quick cleanup was wonderful to see, I think it's imperative that we sit intentionally with the discomfort of these times and what we've heard from people's deep suffering in order to move us in the right direction. This pain and anger that we're seeing and experiencing is real and justified, and protests in a wide variety of forms are a very appropriate response. I'm really grateful to see in the recommendations the consideration of a broader community discussion about trauma. I think that that's going to be really important. So that said, I fully support the demobilization of the National Guard because of the core messages of these demonstrations. Bringing in more uniformed personnel does not send the message that we hear you, and in many ways it sends the opposite message. I believe extending their presence would induce additional trauma in our community. Now, given what's happening around the country, I know that decision is not without risk. And so I'm personally committed to activating people to partner with the city to help ensure future gatherings stay safe. I appreciate the creation of an advisory group for this time. I believe that that was very fruitful. I'm also grateful that the chief plans to be physically present and a part of that as well. And I appreciate the work of Ms. Stout and Mr. Davis in outlining these future possibilities. We have a bright team, and we also have a community who's ready to help. Now, given the curfew, while I can understand the reasoning for that recommendation, I'm not in favor of extending that in our city at this time. I'm really not interested in arresting people who are protesting peacefully. If people break the law, we can make arrests, but if they're peacefully exercising their voice, I'm not interested in stifling that. So I don't know what that means for our discussion this morning, but wanted to express that. I've been trying these past few days to put myself in the shoes of the city staff and of our police department. I'm also trying to put myself in the shoes of those who are in great pain. And I believe that our response at this time should lean toward those who are calling out for change. I believe that the demobilization of the National Guard and not extending the curfew would send the strongest message in our community that Black Lives Matter. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll turn to Commissioner Asasi.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the update, City Manager, and I'll share my thanks for work that was not planned to happen in the midst of everything else that is going on. I too acknowledge and sit with the murder of George Floyd by the hands of police officers in Minneapolis. In some ways, I don't think it's a tragedy, but it was also something that could have been prevented, and I think that is what sits with us much more. I have been reading and reflecting, and national data in March and April of last year of 2019, and then March of April of 2020, the same rate of individuals died by the hands of police officers, and that is during a time where we had been under quarantine most of our country. And in 2019, more people said they were afraid of officer and violence versus community violence. And so I think it's important to put these messages out there. It's important to make sure the narrative stays on, for me, on why individuals decided to go downtown and to be engaged in a protest, myself included. Early on, when Commissioner Kelly and I were sort of transitioning, she shared with me of a very good TED Talk. And in the TED Talk, one of the police chiefs, it's a police chief speaking, and he talks about, and this is really a variation of the Dr. King quote, is that communities don't just want the absence of crime, that we want the presence of justice. And I think that is what we are seeing. I will go and say I do not want the National Guard in our community. I had a lot of people send me messages. I was driving downtown and seeing that on the streets was sobering. I don't support an extension of the curfew. I'll say that. As my colleague just said, I don't know what the recommendations are being passed, but I do want to say if I'm asked to vote on either one of those things, I would vote no. I think the other thing that I want to talk about, I appreciate the updates from Mr. Davis. And while the training and all those pieces that we talked about are good, and that's not the only thing in there, but I think what we're coming to the point as a community is what is the difference between attitudes and behaviors? So I think we may have had some shift in attitudes, and where we need to focus on and where we can be proactive as our community is the behaviors that we engage in. And so many of you probably saw the legislation that Senator Brinks was a co-sponsor of for the state, for MCOs, to add in the duty to intervene. I think these are some of the examples that I want to continue to lift up in our space, because we can get to the point where we can start to be engaging in managerial racism as a commission, as a body, as a city. And so I think that conversations are good. Action is what people are asking for. What are those pieces? And I'm happy to see the things that were shared by Mr. Davis. I also want to acknowledge that many local businesses also have been sharing in this message. I gotta get some takeout from Sanchez. They talked about their building was set on fire, and they talked about the fact that their property can be replaced, but Black lives cannot be replaced. We've seen strong messages from neighboring businesses in our community, Herman Miller, Cascade Engineering, and I will continue to lift those up because there is not just one truth in all of this for me. And I think that's important to remember, that there are many truths in this space and that we have to remember that as we move forward. We don't like to be uncomfortable in this community. And I think we need to sit with this uncomfortableness. We need to sit with this rage and emotion. And that is part of this complex, healing that we want to occur in our community. So I do have a couple other questions. So that's sort of my comments. I was concerned about the messages that were coming out about the media interfering. If we do not have media, if we do not have people documenting, I feel that is in direct contrast to transparency and accountability. I share in those statements of Commissioner Repart, those who have been arrested who are violating the curfew order. I would look for us to engage in our decriminalization efforts and do any expungements or waive those fines. I also think that we need to identify additional resources around the communications around what's happening. I think that there are some opportunities for us to have what I would consider more crisis communications or strategic communications. We've got families that are trying to engage with their young children and young people about what does this mean. So I would look for additional opportunities there as well. So those are my comments about all those things that have happened over these couple of days, and I look forward to this continued conversation. This is not, as we all know, it's not going to be for this one commission meeting. Thank you.
Mayor, since she did have a question about the media interfering, several people have asked. Should we have the chief address that at this time?
Sure. Let's go ahead, and if there are any questions that you hear from commissioners, feel free to answer them, and then I'll turn to Commissioner.
Okay. All right. So Chief, if you can come on and talk about the communications concerns about the in the post from your department around media.
Yes, sir. At the time that went out, I must back up. Very early on in yesterday's incident, we allowed the media access to the inner perimeter. Basically, there were no restrictions on them. They could move about and do their job in reporting what was going on. It was at the time when bottles and things started being thrown after the curfew, after a half-hour warning of that 7 o'clock was the curfew, and then bottles and things start being thrown, was when arrests started to take place. As officers were attempting to make the arrest for curfew, they were utilizing bicycles and to get out to the people that they were attempting to arrest, and media was attempting to interview people. It created an atmosphere where the concern was for the media representatives that they may end up getting injured in the course of being there while the arrest was being taking place, and things were being thrown. That was the reason for the advisory for the media to please clear the area.
All right, thank you, Chief. City Manager, do you want to add anything before I turn to Commissioner?
No, I just want to clarify with the chief and make sure clear, because this is being asked. Chief, you can keep your mic on, and maybe we can ask our communications director to follow up. But what I understood, at least when I followed up on the inquiry, is that the officers thought that it wasn't the covering of the arrest, it was the impediment towards interfering. Is that correct?
That is correct. And at that point was when the advisory went out requesting that the media
Yeah.
to move about.
And so what I'll do is I don't know if that was vetted through our emergency operations center. Matter of fact, I don't think it was, because I was not aware of that before it went out. So I'll ask our communications director to follow up.
Thank you, City Manager. And I do agree with Commissioner Sassi. I think it would be nice to increase some of our support around strategic and crisis communication.
Commissioner Moody, can you put yours on mute? Maybe that will help.
I think it's mute his.
Okay.
Muted. Payne, can you mute? There you go. Is that better? Okay. So I just want to thank Commissioner Sassi for her comments, and I agree that we should look at identifying some additional resources to help with strategic and crisis communications. I think that's where we could add some capacity to help. And I agree, we're getting lots of questions from a lot of people throughout our community. And it would be nice to kind of pull that together and have some extra resources. So thank you for that recommendation. Now to
I'm gonna elevate that. I'm gonna ask Assistant City Manager Matthews to follow up on that and to remedy that moving forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, City Manager. Commissioner Moody, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, let me thank the City Manager and yourself and Payne and the police, the fire chief, for the work that you guys have done these last few days. My biggest concern that I have right now is the extending the curfew hours. I'm afraid that if we go to 8:30, there's a possibility that other groups out there may decide to plan something that may be inappropriate for our city. I do believe that it's important for those business owners to have the opportunity to restore their businesses. I did not hear if there was anything in place for that right now. That's my concern. My other concern is that, I do believe that it is up to us as a city to make sure that our law enforcement do their job appropriately. So in terms of the curfew, I will vote against extending that because I'm afraid that it could open up a door for other groups to come in and begin to do different types of damages. My other concern is that, we have to face the fact that we are in a society where we really have to deal with racism. That's the front and center of our problem in America. We skate around it. We call it the elephant in the room, but we really need to deal with it. We cannot make good policies unless we deal with racism. I am concerned that this city has opened up a door. As you see, both white and blacks were protesting. I saw that a lot of the damage were done downtown primarily by a large number of white people. So that sends a message that something is seriously wrong in our country. And we need to figure out some ways to handle that.
Thank you. Mayor, can I ask for clarification from Commissioner Moody? So what I heard you say you're opposed to extending the curfew, or does that mean you don't want any curfew, or you would like it to be maintained at 7 p.m.?
City Manager, I would like it to maintain at 7 p.m. because, as I said earlier, I'm concerned that that would open up a door for other groups to try to plan something that might be destructive to our city because the extended hours of daylight. For me, I think that we need to be careful and maintain what we have at this point. However, I do believe that the business owners should be allowed to have individuals who are working on their buildings to restore those buildings should be some kind of provision for them. But I just want to be careful that we don't have any more destruction in our city.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, others who wish to weigh in on this? Let's see, Commissioner Jones or Commissioner, I'll start with Commissioner Lanier.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Manager and team for the presentation. I want to start with talking specifically about Mr. George Floyd's murder and how casual the officer was with tucking his hand in his pocket as he was murdering Mr. Floyd on camera in broad daylight. And I think the comfort that he demonstrated is tied to this nation not addressing the murderers of Black people in this nation. And so I think if we don't, I think we need to spend some time really talking about that issue and addressing the concerns that people are expressing in light of those issues across the nation. I appreciate the recommendations that were brought forth. Many of those recommendations are recommendations that I know we have implemented in the past. I didn't even realize that the police chief no longer had an advisory group. So to see that was more of a surprise because I thought that still existed. I think that it's important that our police agency, who has spent several years as we've made a lot of changes to our local policies and practices, it's important for them to be able to act when they are seeing people breaking the law. And on Saturday, I think what we experienced was persons breaking the law, and the reaction for one reason or another was not taken immediately. And I think, from what we're being told, that the possibility of instigators being in our city, infiltrating a peaceful march with the whole purpose of trying to bring the chaos that existed Saturday night was what transpired. And, so I'm very interested in hearing more about why we went from that form of policing to what I would consider the opposite extreme of policing, which included bringing in the National Guard. The federal government tweeted about what the purpose of the National Guard will be, and that is anyone who loots should be shot. And to me, that was quite clear. And because of that, that gave me pause, and that gives me concern about having the National Guard in our city. I think as we are bringing in additional law enforcement to help us to navigate the large crowds that potentially could be protesting, I think it's important for those agencies to be aware of the practices of Grand Rapids, because we've spent so much time working on police and community engagement. And if we don't, then we potentially could have a different crisis in our city that I know we all would not welcome. I have questions about whether body cams were being worn by anyone and everyone, I should say, who participated in supporting us, because that's a practice for Grand Rapids. And so as we're bringing more people in, we want to make sure that they're able to have the same tools that we've put in place to protect our law enforcement as well as our citizens. I think it's important for a community to be able to share or exercise their right of freedom of speech without it necessarily being organized by the agency or the body that they are indeed protesting against. Though I understand why we would want to come alongside to try and help people to do this better. I just think people have a right to be able to express whatever it is that they want to express in this nation without having to get approval, permission, or to get it organized by any entity. I am sorry to have seen the damage that was caused by the riots from Saturday night. And as Commissioner Isasi expressed, I think there are a number of businesses across the city who are also saying that that was very frustrating for them to see. And some of those business owners are people we know personally, but at the same time, as they were expressing that that was a challenge for them, they also recognize that that hiccup for them certainly does not warrant us not doing what's best to make sure that the Black lives that are being murdered in our nation aren't addressed and that issue isn't addressed. And so I think the balance with that is making sure that we side with lives over property. I think that one of the things, and let me preface this with saying, I'm no expert in policing, but as I talked about the extreme, Commissioner White shared with me as he was transitioning. So Commissioner Isasi, as you were talking about your elder transitioning, I got transitioned as well. And one of the things he talked about was make sure you always come with a solution if you're not necessarily supportive of what's being offered. And so I wonder if the tools that the National Guard used yesterday, if those same tools could be used without the support of the National Guard. So for instance, there were vehicles blocking streets. There were, they had the shields. And so I think those were things that were absent on Saturday. And I wonder, as we're trying to prevent the chaos that transpired on Saturday, can we implement some of those other strategies? And I know the men and women of our agency will probably have, even more ideas of how we can create these human barriers to make sure that we control the crowd. I think what we saw is the response yesterday was really in response to the type of people that live in the city of Grand Rapids. So we asked them to not create chaos, and then people responded. I think the number of people who were arrested says that people were responding to the request for not looting. I think the recommendation about expungement is one that I support, but with a caveat. I think anyone who was breaking the law, that record should not be expunged. So if you were throwing things at the police, then that's breaking a totally different law than being outside of the curfew that was enacted. And so I think those things should not be expunged, because I am never in a position where I would want someone breaking the law and our law enforcement being in a predicament where they can't act on that or feel like they're not being supported as they're doing what they've been hired to do. And I think it'll create too much angst for them to know when to arrest, when not to arrest, and what the activity needs to be or not need to be. And I think I'm just kind of checking my notes to make sure I've covered everything I have here. I think the last thing that I'll say is, speaking of communication, I think that though I was not supportive of the curfew and still not supportive of the curfew because I think other things could be in place, I think that the timing of the communication is what was a concern for me, and not necessarily what the communication was. So I'm not necessarily interested in us getting a contract with a consulting firm to have them help us during crisis communication, because I think we have the capacity internally to be able to do that. I think when we communicate is an easy problem to resolve. And we communicated with 4.5-hour notice to a community that we were instituting a curfew. And as a result of that, a jogger in Commissioner Moody's neighborhood was stopped or pulled over, if you will, because they hadn't gotten wind that a communication had transpired. And it's because people aren't sitting in social media land, nor are they watching the news on television. I'm one of those persons. And so if I were not connected to all of this, I would not have gotten that communication early enough. And so I think that was one aspect of it. And the other aspect is that when it was communicated, we did not have, though equity is embedded across all of our strategic plan, we did not have an equitable way that we were sharing that information, because we did not have those documents and all the information and even the frequently asked questions completed, translated, and ready to go out to the public. And in light of that, I think, it's the timing of how and when we're communicating what we're communicating. And with that, I yield back to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I really appreciate you bringing up those concerns, and I know that you expressed them. And, I will take responsibility for some of those, just knowing moving as quickly as possible based on the information we had and the recommendations that we were receiving. And I ultimately take responsibility for making that decision on Sunday. So thank you for bringing that to light. And I know that you did on Sunday as well. I'd like the city manager to address a couple of the things that you brought up. We've heard from a number of folks who were concerned about the response on Saturday. And so I would like the opportunity for the chief and or the city manager to respond to that. And then the recommendation to utilize the National Guard. So that was a recommendation also made Sunday morning. And I think a little bit more background on that would be helpful so that you can all understand why that recommendation was made by our chiefs and by the city manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And we'll try to unpack many of the issues that Commissioner Lanier identified. And so I share in that responsibility. The recommendation to operate in crisis management was because we were in a crisis that we were under resourced for. And as the fire chief said, even in our best emergency planning efforts, we did anticipate, we did plan. The chief had additional staff. The turnout, because of the unplanned, unpermitted event. And by the way, a similar event is planned for tomorrow with the same organizer from Saturday. Our intelligence is telling us we will have yet another unplanned, unpermitted event with 3,000 people have indicated interest in attending tomorrow at 4:00. And so knowing now what we know, we have the ability to be more resourced than we were for Saturday. And what I'm hearing is the desire for us to not avail ourselves of the current resources. So what we relied on was not only the experience that we had that was uncontrollable until 4 a.m. in the morning, and the chief will have to, and I don't want to get into the operational details, but the chief can talk a little bit more about how we manage that. Waking up after 20 hours or so of officers on straight shift, we needed to have replenished resources for the next day. And so the request for the state and the National Guard was made. And the National Guard, keep in mind, was not only there for military police, but also for engineering to help with the damage assessment and assessment. Our community is so responsible and reactive. The very next morning, they began to clean up and the boarding prior to the National Guard arriving. But in many instances, that's not the case in many other communities. And the National Guard would have been prepared to do exactly what our community members have done at no cost to our community, but it takes them a while to mobilize. And I can't recall the exact time, but I'm thinking at least 8 hours or so it took for the mobilization. And because of that, and not knowing to expect that night, we wanted to make sure we didn't have several continuous nights of rioting and looting that we were unable to manage. And so the outcome is what we were managing towards. And certainly there are perceptions associated with that, but we saw the highest priority at that time was to get our city back under law and order and control. And it was uncontrollable. I was there on site and seeing personally, first, not just by what was on the news. The news was just the tip of the iceberg of what was happening. But I was there in police command headquarters where members of the community had barricaded officers in and would not allow them to get out, and had tied multiple belts around the door that officers had every right to bulldoze and do everything but yet we work from a more collaborative and cooperative way. There could have been many, many more lives that have been affected. I saw the attempts to infiltrate the police department's garage, so lift the garage, break the door, run under the door, where officers could have accelerated and ran over community members. So it was that fear. It was out of control. It was unbelievable. It was horrific. I saw firsthand on the ground level where officers were stacked like a human wall, back to back. A lot of resources were in the police department to make sure that they would not be taken over like what happened in Minneapolis and burned to the ground. We don't have multiple stations. That was it. And then once we lose the police command headquarters, we have lost that city, and it would have gone on for a lot longer. So that was the mindset that we were reacting when we made that decision. We made a desperate decision because we were in a desperate situation and we needed to get control of our city. And that is what we have on a peaceful day now that we can talk about that other communities can't. So I share in that. I'm going to let the chief talk about the operations around that. A couple other things. On the, why don't you go ahead and address that, Chief, and I'll come to some of the other concerns.
Yes, sir. I'll start out by saying I am very much appreciative to the National Guard and the governor allowing them to come here and assist. With that said, having the National Guard on the city of Grand Rapids was never what I ever envisioned I would be requesting. That was a big decision to call them in. It was necessary to do that. Our resources were deplenishing, and I still have concerns about the fatigue of officers. And I want to make sure, and the city manager characterize what was occurring here at the police department. It's not that this department is valued more in a sense of loss than any other business that was damaged out here. We had civilians in here working. We had to protect them. And he is exactly right. If we'd lost this police department, we would have had no way to continue to manage this event as it was unfolding. So with that said, we do have several other events scheduled for tomorrow. We are working on resourcing that. The National Guard are demobilizing, breaking down their operation and their assistance. They've assured us that they could come back. We still have to put in an operational plan to make sure that we have the resources that are available to make sure the safety. I feel my number one goal is the safety of everyone involved. We got through a very trying time without significant injury or loss of life. I will take that, but it is not acceptable for the amount of damage that was done either. So we will work on that and try to ensure that doesn't happen again. But my number one priority is safety of everyone, even those that are creating the chaos. And to not make arrests was a strategic decision to allow our officers to have time to do in a coordinated manner what they were able to do. Yesterday, we had the resources to make those arrests. Saturday, we did not. We were just trying to maintain some sort of civility and get the city back to where the chaos was not occurring. Commissioner Lanier, you brought up a point about body cameras. I believe we're the only department that had body cameras. Other departments did not have them. So our actions are documented.
Okay, and Chief, let me just touch on a couple other things and maybe you can help in. Sure. If we because no other, if the body camera equipment and the National Guard doesn't have the body camera equipment. If we only use resources that have that, well, certainly we have the ability, regardless if you have body camera or not, if we had aerial cameras, we did have the ability to deploy those from the fire department. Those are additional footage, but it's not as close up. But there could be other accountability for critical incidents in those cases with aerial cameras and using the aerial drone that the fire department has to be deployed. But I will just make sure I do not condone any statement around anything that's been said outside the city around if you look, we shoot. And not only do we not condone it, we didn't do it. So that is just not our approach. The National Guard did not, again, make any arrests. You saw they were basically human barriers. Thank you, Chief. Human barriers that allowed for additional resourcing, and but we're talking about something that is no longer asset. So they are redeploying unless we need them for a critical situation. And if what happened on Saturday night happened again, I would make the same decision all over again to protect this city, to make sure that we are able to restore law and order as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. And without those assets and without those curfew, those were tools that we were not able to be in this position and have the luxury that many cities don't have after the riots, to have a policy meeting that takes multiple hours, because we will be still focusing on how to promote calm in our community. The curfew, I'm still not clear on the curfew, and that whether or not that is like Commissioner Moody, no curfew or time extension. And so that would help if we could just get clarity on, for me, and perhaps I misunderstood. And then on the expungement, I would defer to the city attorney to address those issues on expunging for looting versus other serious criminal matters. And I think I echo escalating this to crisis communication. I think we got to get better at it, but again, we are doing the best we can to manage this under some very, very challenging circumstances. And we're going to ask the police department, the fire department, to do some critical debriefs, and we're going to have other departments doing that as well. But because we're still ongoing in this situation, we have not had a chance to do a full post brief. I believe the police department has done some preliminaries, and we will, as we get more information, we'll certainly brief out to the extent it doesn't compromise our security. So, City Attorney, can you talk about the expungement process?
Certainly. So keep in mind that there's two agencies involved, the City Attorney's Office and the Kent County Prosecutor's Office. So those charges that are made under the Grand Rapids City Code, certainly we will take each one case by case, look at the activities, and any of those that warrant, it wouldn't be an expungement, but we would, under our restorative justice, then make adjustments to those charges. But it'll be based case by case, and certainly we'll take each one into consideration. Those that fall under the Kent County Prosecutor's Office, we don't have authority to do anything with those. For instance, if there's looting or there's malicious destruction of property over $500, we do not have authority in those particular cases. If there's a resist obstructing a police officer, depending if it's written under the city code or the state code, that's going to depend whether or not we have authority over.
So, City Manager, to respond to your question about the first, I would like to say, City Attorney, thank you for those comments, and I think that it's probably more of dropping charges than it is expungement. And I think the follow-up would be, how do we coordinate then with the county so that they know if this body agrees to take that path, that they know kind of what we're trying to accomplish with asking that request. And, I think it would be good to hear those who are in support of that, what their thoughts are on some of the other charges, because I truly would like, some of the images that I saw of people breaking out windows and damaging property. We have images of them. I know that there are already some arrests made and some of the damage that had been done to some of the property downtown. And so, I would hope that, and looting as well. And so I would hope that we would take the appropriate action for those particular actions. But to answer your question, City Manager, regarding the curfew, so I did not agree that there should have been a curfew enacted originally, and I still stand with that position. I think we are in a state where we have been under the governor's executive order for I don't know how many weeks now, and as we are finally getting to the point where the governor is lifting that, then the local body, or the local municipality now has a curfew. And I just think, I still believe that with the proper conversations, especially a public discussion like this, and the a press release and all the information that has gone out, telling those of us who are neighbors and friends and businesses who are, a part of this community, this isn't the way to handle this. I think they are responding to that. And I think that those instigators or agitators that are coming and infiltrating what's trying to be done peacefully, they should be handled appropriately if they break the law. And I think that, that's the way to handle that. And I don't think a curfew is what should be instituted to do so.
May I interject also, City Manager and Mayor? I want to clarify my view on the curfew. As Commissioner Lanier stated earlier, one of my neighbors was just jogging, and she was pulled over and asked to go home. Her mindset was that she thought the curfew dealt specifically with the downtown area and not with the neighborhood. When I mentioned that I was not in favor of extending the curfew hours, what I meant was I am not in favor of going to 8:30 because I feel that there are organizations out there who have infiltrated a good protest and turned it into something destructive, and those things could still be planned. I do not want to give them the daylight hours to plan something that would be more destructive for the city. That's what my point of view was. As far as extending it to June the 7th, I don't have a problem with that. My problem is taking it from to the 8:30 mark. I would not want us to extend that hour to 8:30 to 5 or 7 in the morning. I think we should leave it as it is right now because we have some level of control. And then at the same time, with Chief Payne preparing himself to be in the midst of that group, somewhere along the line, I know he's going to have the support that he needs. But where do we as city officials stand in times like this when we have protests? I don't like being at home, for one. I need to be out there somewhere. And there are groups of pastors that are mobilizing to figure out how can they help. So we need some clarity in that arena as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Moody. All right, Commissioner O'Connor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I too just have great disgust for what happened to George Floyd, and it's just terrible to have witnessed that as one of many continued atrocities. And as we kind of navigate through this, I have my reservations about a curfew being enacted in Grand Rapids, but I think for the 2 days that it's been in place, it was the correct call. We needed a moment of pause after the peaceful events of Saturday evening turned into an event of violence and destruction. And However, I do think that now we've had a moment to pause and a moment to kind of recoup and regather ourselves. I'm not in favor of seeing the curfew extended any further. We continue to reserve the right and the ability to put a curfew back in place if necessary. But I think a pause has come. We've been able to have some conversations and some dialogue with folks in the community, and I don't think anyone wants to see destruction reign in Grand Rapids. That's not who we are. That's not what we stand for. And it's not about the buildings being destroyed. I mean, I walked downtown Sunday and saw the people coming together to clean up the damage, and a lot of windows were broken, a lot of some graffiti. But at the end of the day, again, there were no lives lost. There was no major injuries reported, and so I think we have to give the community the respect to not put this curfew back in place, and trust that they are, we will continue to see peace in moving forward. And if the events change, we have the ability to reinstitute a curfew if necessary, if that's a measure that needs to be taken. I appreciate the comments of the chief, and I think that's something that's been a bit lost in this conversation as we talk about the original pandemic of COVID happening, and we've asked folks to modify their work schedules. And not only did some of our officers work 20 hours that day, that they may have been at the end of an 84-hour work week, as we asked them to go into probably what is one of the most stressful and intense situations that they've had to deal with. And our men and women of both the police and fire department showed considerable restraint and patience. And it's got to be incredibly hard to watch your city burn while you stand by. But they showed that restraint, and that was, it took a lot to do that. And I'm appreciative of the fact that they did that. Seeing the National Guard roll into our community was, I understand why it was done. I'm glad that they're leaving. And not that, having that support wasn't again necessary for this kind of couple of days of pause. But when President of the United States quotes terrible racists from the past, like George Wallace, when the looting and shooting, that is completely unacceptable. And I expect better from our federal leadership in these times of crisis to help us find ways to come together and move forward, and not incite violence. And so I just think the presence of the duty of law enforcement is to protect and serve, and they're doing that as best they can right now. But adding a militaristic component to this is just, I think, further exacerbating the flames of mistrust between Grand Rapids and the community. So I hope and I pray that our police department can continue to do the best they can to make sure that everyone stays safe, and I hope we can move forward. But I don't want to see the curfew extended at this point in time.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Connor. And Commissioner Jones, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to begin by saying I'm sure I'm not alone in being the recipient of a lot of calls and texts from friends and colleagues and family who are checking in on me, and I'm sure, again, all of my colleagues on the commission, you've received the same type of communication. And I keep, when asked about it, I always explain. Part of my response is, in terms of my emotional state, is I'm experiencing a roller coaster of emotions, and I say that because, as many of you know, I had the opportunity to actually be down there and took a walk with Mayor Bliss and with Brandon Davis, and saw firsthand the activities that the rioting, the idiocy, the destruction of property, both public and private. I'm convinced that you had three types of individuals. And by the way, I also started down, as did another one of my colleagues, started down at the Rosa Parks Circle around the 6 o'clock hour, as I was approached the day before by one of the organizers and asked to pray, to bring a prayer before the march took place. And I consider that an honor, as I saw it also as an opportunity, hopefully, to speak to the importance of peace and just commending the organizers for the decision to engage in a silent protest. And so I was down there for that reason and followed the march and left and came back down and again saw what I saw. And it was from my purview that you had three types of individuals who were present in downtown. I'm sure there were other categories, but you had individuals who came with the intent of operating in solidarity for the death of Brother George Floyd, and wanting to express their disappointment, their hurt, their rage about the loss of his life and just the continuous loss of life of people of color, in particular, Black folk, at the hands of law enforcement. And they wanted to express that. They wanted that freedom to be present and to operate in solidarity. And that was present. The other that you had were individuals who felt that same way, but perhaps their anger that they had was pent up and they didn't want to necessarily operate in a place of quiet. They wanted to just let that rage come out because they were tired. And as Fannie Lou Hamer so appropriately put it, they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And then you had the third group, which were individuals whose sole purpose was to come and to inflict chaos and do all that they could to bring about destruction and lead the charge and in many ways agitate. That is, in my opinion, based on what I saw from being down there, those were the three groups or three types of individuals that were down there. Again, I'm sure there were more, and we're talking about people of all ethnic backgrounds and races and sexual orientation. Everybody was down there who fit into whatever category that society has created. And so I say a roller coaster of emotions because I first want to address the fact that I know I'm not law enforcement, but I'd like to make it perfectly clear that my hope is that there are perhaps some folks who have come from the outside who are agitators, who, by the way, as the head of a historic civil rights organization, I don't need them to do our bidding in terms of the civil rights of those who have been historically marginalized. That's number one. Number two, I need them to know that although I'm not law enforcement, I almost feel obligated to jump in my car and ride around and look for them if they desire to want to cause chaos again in my city. And I will personally do one of two things. I will personally look to find out where they are and try to find them and dial 911 my damn self, or if need be, get out of my car and share with them why I don't need them here to do my bidding. Because what I realize is we have people here who care about our city, who are frustrated, fed up, tired of the promises, sick and tired of being sick and tired. They want reform, and I feel them. I'm with them. And they have a desire to want to engage in a way that does not simultaneously cause things to occur with law with us here in Grand Rapids left holding the bag. I ain't got time for that. And so if there are those who fit that category who are watching, I drive a white Toyota Highlander. And so I'll be that Negro driving around potentially downtown because that's how I'm feeling right now. Number two, anybody who actually thinks that our city manager, looked forward to or somehow got his jollies off of calling in the National Guard, I need you to do me a favor, step back because you're operating in a totally different reality. I don't know of any city manager or CEO of a city who would dare, who would look forward to calling in the National Guard in their city. That is what you call, in many ways, the last resort, and that's what he did. He can speak for himself, but I'm telling you right now, especially as a man who has been, as Mark Washington, a man who has been Black all of his life, and we have all seen different images of the different activities that have occurred when the National Guard shows up. So anybody who has the audacity to put that out there that this is an effort on his part to try to create a police state. Again, step back for a second and come out of your virtual reality, because I know for a fact that his decision to do that had everything to do with wanting to make sure that there was the opportunity to have law and order in our city again, based on what he saw and experienced on Saturday. Another thing I want to mention is I am not in favor of extending the curfew at all, but I will say this. Commissioner Lanier said it best in terms of the advice that she got from Commissioner White. If you want to come forward with all that is reminding us all that is wrong and unjust about our city and our country, I have a list too to make lists. I can add some things in terms of all the things that are unjust. But what is needed is the willingness to come forward, to lean in, to be a part of the solution, to understand that the solutions that are being discussed might not be things that you totally agree with, but this is where I would lean on the advice of my elders who have said we have to learn to disagree without being disagreeable. We got to find a way to fix this thing that is broken. And there's a lot of brokenness that's going on right now in our city, other than the windows that were shattered on Saturday. There's been brokenness in our city. It's been broke. And I just happen to believe that as a collective, we have the capacity to repair that which has been broken. And I believe in all my heart, and those of you who are watching and listening, who want to put me in the category of naive, you have every right to do so. But I believe we also have the power to create, again, a city, a police force, a community that is a model. I believe that. And I also believe that we have a city manager who has the capacity, who has the intellect and the know-how to continue to lead us in a direction as a city that will get us back to a place, or get us to a place where we can have more opportunities for more people in our city. Because ultimately, what this comes down to is, or what we see, or part of what the rage is about is, what's the expectation? What do you expect when you have a people group that has been historically marginalized? Is the expectation that we're just supposed to continue to say, oh, okay, we'll wait till you get around to us. And that is the manifestation of what we saw to some extent on this past weekend, is folk just tired of waiting. And I understand, fully understand. And so I will be present. I will be out. I will be driving around. I will look to encourage others to engage, to lean in. And I'm looking to come to tables and to have discourse. I'm looking to make it fully clear, just perfectly clear that, if, what we saw in Minneapolis, Minnesota, if we have anyone in law enforcement in the county of Kent and the city of Grand Rapids who perhaps shares the sentiment or perhaps sees themselves as having the same mindset of the officer who put his knee on George Floyd, I'm gonna ask you to go ahead and just go ahead, turn your badge into to Chief Payne, because that is not accepted here. And if that is your mindset, then get to stepping. And I'm not talking from a place of Pollyanna right now. I'm talking from a place of being tired. And so I applaud my colleagues for their willingness to continue to stand up and to deal with the difficult. And I am so sure that if what we're doing right now in terms of our role as city commissioners, if it was easy, I tell you, everybody and their mother would be doing it or trying to do it. But I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, I'm gonna confess right now that the vast majority that we are dealing with right now, it ain't black, it ain't white, it's gray, and it's murky. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones. So commissioners, as I shared with all of you on Sunday, I used my authority as mayor to do a declaration of emergency and install a curfew. And even with hearing from a lot of people that I know and respect and adore, and I know I've heard from people who strongly disagree with that decision that I made, I still believe it was the right decision to make, and I stand by that. But on Sunday, I told all of you that I would not continue to act unilaterally. I don't believe that that's the democratic process. Every single one of you were elected by people in this city. You bring great wisdom and voice, and you are voices for every single person that you represent. And I made it clear that I would not continue to move forward with this without all of us being a part of the decision. And so it's clear that we will not be supporting moving forward with extending the declaration of emergency or the curfew. And I appreciate all of you for sharing your thoughts and the pain and the suffering that not only you share, but so many people in our city share. I know all of our hearts have broken many times, and now is the time to lift people up and bring them together. And as we move forward, it's going to take all of us working together, just as so many of you have said this morning. It's going to take all of us working together with our partners to ensure that we have a safe city and a safe space for people to come together and grieve and share their thoughts and pain and outrage, but also to move forward together as a community. And we need the community with us. We need to make sure that we're empowering them to join us in this work and to make sure that we continue to have safety for anyone that wants to come and safely lift up their voices in this city. So we will talk about how we're going to do that together and making sure that we are able to connect with the many people who we need to rely on in this community to join us in this work. So I will turn it back over to
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, commissioners, for your very thoughtful and deliberative comments. This is what public policy is. It is our role as staff to make sure that we do the proper analysis, give you our best thinking, bring forth our recommendations. But at the end of the day, on these policy issues, these are your decisions, and we will do our best to implement. what is or your decision or the lack thereof of a decision in this instance. There is no decision that the curfew will expire. I would, and I want to thank all the staff for their work in working on these issues, and many who worked very, very late last night to bring forth what we've had for a significant policy discussion this morning. I want to ask our city attorney if she would, just a matter of protocol. There is one aspect of the extension of the state of civil emergency that allows the city to implement things such as a curfew. Is there any other unintended consequence by not doing that beyond? We're clearly not interested in the extension of curfew. The commission's not. But if there is any other benefits we might forego from a state or federal reimbursement by not operating outside of that declaration, City Attorney, can you answer that?
Yes, City Manager, but if I could address a couple things before that really quick. I think it's important to clarify one thing and make a comment on the other, because I didn't get into respond to Commissioner Lanier after her response. So it's important to know that the City Commission, no one from the City Commission can mandate or persuade us on the disposition or give the appearance of such on a case. So our commitment is that we will look at these cases case by case with fairness and equitable lens. Under our diversion program, that's what we do on a daily basis, and we will do that with these cases as well. So I wanted to clear that up, get that on the record. Secondly, with I know no one's interested in the curfew. Part of that was based on that this was a really peaceful protest until nighttime. At nighttime, everything went awry. That's going on around the country. Recently in Vegas and St. Louis, there were shootings, and those occurred at nighttime. So at the time of implementing the curfew, those were the thoughts that were in mind. And City Manager talked about us dialing back on that, and because there are discussions around the country that these events happen more than one day, and because there's indication that we're going to have other demonstrations or protests, even perhaps on Saturday, that are similar, then we wanted to keep the curfew in place, dial it back. And as long as we have peaceful days, then we get closer to getting rid of that. So I just wanted that on the record. Lastly, in answer to what you're asking, on the agenda today is a resolution to extend the emergency, the state of civil emergency. It's not to extend the curfew. And just because you extend the state of civil emergency does not automatically mean that we're extending the curfew or even having a curfew. But what it allows is for the mayor to be able to have that authority if we need to move quickly. A lot of the faults in communication are because we had to move quickly. And even though we move quickly, we made every effort possible to be able to get the word out, not just social media and media, but also with the Office of Oversight and Accountability to be able to have meetings with community leaders and the neighborhood associations and ask for their assistance in helping us get that out there. So we did make a lot of effort to be able to get out there as fast as we can under a very limited timeline. So what's on the agenda is to ask that the extension, not the extension of the curfew, but the extension of the emergency, state of emergency, just until the next commission meeting, because if we have something that happens in between time, so if we get to the next commission meeting, nothing's happened, then we're done. But if we have something that happens in between now and then we have to come back and get you to, approve it and take time. Like that night, it took us some time to get through the law, get the proclamation typed up and get the order typed up by allowing the mayor to have that already in place and not have to keep coming back, not in place the curfew, but in place that authority to work under the state of emergency and do those things in which our charter under charter under section 161 allows the mayor a number of things, not just curfew. Curfew is only one measure. And it was the one measure that we deemed we needed at the time, but there's also other things. And we can send that to you, other things that the mayor is allowed to do if we need those in the event of another civil disturbance.
Yeah.
It also allows us, I'm almost done. It also allows us to be able to tap into state resources. So we were allowed to get the National Guard here. We were allowed to be able to perhaps get funding to help us in recovery. So it's important that we separate the two, the civil emergency, state of civil emergency extension from the curfew. Does that, anybody have questions on that, or does that make sense?
No, City Attorney, I think that's, thank you for your input. So a couple of thoughts on that. You know, I am hopeful that, and very optimistic that we will not have a repeat of Saturday night, that we are actively putting plans in place to ensure safety. And we're going to be doing that and calling on community to help us in that work. And you know, secondly, I understand the difference between two. There's the declaration of emergency and then the ability to set a curfew as one of many items that are allowed after setting a declaration of emergency. And what I'm saying is I'm not going to recommend that either of those move forward. If we end up in a position, and I pray that we don't, if we end up in a position where there is a crisis that we need to respond to, we will, what I would like to do, and what I'm going to ask all of you, is that I would call an emergency gathering with all of you so that you can be briefed and have all of the information that I was given Saturday morning, so that you don't feel like you're not a part of the process or the decision as we move forward together.
Let me just ask for a matter of procedure on that, because in crisis, minutes are critical. So, Mr. Hunter, if we were to do that emergency meeting, what would be the protocol, and how much procedural things will we have to go through in order to get a meeting, to get a decision in the midst of a crisis?
A normal open meetings act, and I'll defer to the city attorney as well if I don't have this correct. And I'll ask Mr. Strom, probably he's watching, to look at the Open Meetings Act, because there's different things for an emergency as well. Normal protocol for Open Meetings Act is, according to our charter, 2 city commissioners make in a written form, may call for a special meeting, and then it has to be posted 18 hours ahead of the meeting. I believe there's some other language that I don't know off the top of my head, because it's so rarely enacted, that there's some emergency protocols for calling for Open Meetings Act. I mean, for a emergency meeting of the commission.
Okay. I need to, before we end, I need to know that the need to make an emergency decision will not result in bureaucratic process that would require hours of notifications and coordinations before we get to a decision. We just don't have that time. So maybe not now, but before tonight, if we need to.
I got it now, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
The language says a public body may meet an emergency session in the event of a severe and imminent threat to the health, safety, or welfare of the public when 2/3 of the members serving on the body decide that delay would be detrimental to efforts to lessen or respond to the threat.
All right, thank you. So Commissioner Lanier?
So 2 questions. I was gonna ask about what the city clerk just mentioned, that there are provisions without notice. And so that was just shared. The other thing is I don't see the agenda item that the city attorney is referencing on the agenda. I would want to know in section 161 what those provisions are, because though I'm not supportive of the National Guard or the curfew, there may be other things, Madam Mayor, that I may be very supportive of you having the authority to take action on. Obviously, I would prefer being aware and us being called into a meeting. But to the city manager's point, there are some things that are so urgent that even gathering us all together may be a little bit more challenging to address them. So I don't see the agenda item, and it would be great to kind of hear, and maybe this is something we can discuss at 7 p.m. What those items are, so then maybe we could give the authority fully aware of what it is we're giving authority to.
Yeah, and Commissioner Lear, I'll double check. I believe those are spelled out in the documents that I sent on Sunday, but I will double check to make sure, and we'll make sure that you have that information.
Okay, I just want to jump in 1 second. Just to let people, if they're tuning in for the Economic Development Project Team meeting at 12:30, we are still in committee of the whole, just to let programming know.
Okay, so just for clarity, so in the state of emergency, if we want to have an immediate meeting, we would need 5 commissioners to agree to meet.
That is correct.
Is it agreed to meet, or is it for 5 commissioners to be present? At minimum, 5 commissioners to be present. I just want to make that, because there's a difference there, and I think it's just 5 commissioners being present.
No, it just says 2/3 of the members serving on the body decide that delay would be detrimental.
So
they're going to need to be present. So an answer to your question is be present. Yeah.
Thank you. So, because I think, if we're polled, if someone calls me and says, how do you feel about it? I could say yes to that. But if I'm not available to be present, then it counts for nothing. So being present is how you can make the decision, because that would have to be made with all being present. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. And City Manager, we'll get some clarity, and we'll take a closer look at this. Make sure all of you have the information that the city attorney was referring to, so that you don't feel like you're not informed. So
yeah, just for clarity, I think the city attorney was speaking of a possible, based on the outcome of the briefing this morning, if there was a desire, we would do a walk-on and suspend the rules. And so and we didn't want to be presumptuous and get ahead of the conversation. So therefore you did not see it on the agenda. That's why we have the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for, I think that did create a little confusion. So thank you.
I apologize for that.
All right. So city commissioners, any other thoughts before we close and move to economic development, and then we're back together tonight at 7?
There, we have one other item on the marijuana we didn't discuss. And I think our intent was going to postpone the full briefing on that until next week, but to highlight at least through thoughts and recommendations in short. Many of you have gotten a memorandum from staff indicating that, and it should have been communicated. We're happy to just do a summation if that's the preference, or we can suspend that till later on tonight and take it up then.
I'll defer to commissioners, but I'll make a recommendation that we defer the full briefing. I think where there is interest in fast tracking is around allowing processors, growers, and transporters to do adult use outside of our city for customers they have throughout the state that allow adult use. So if maybe we can just take that one piece and let the staff know we would like to see that on the agenda next week, and then do a full briefing next week, or at our next meeting. I think that is what I would recommend. Commissioners, are you in supportive of that? I see thumbs up. Okay. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 thumbs up. I see Commissioner O'Connor saying no. Commissioner O'Connor, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to continue to reiterate that I think existing medical marijuana provisioning centers should be allowed to begin selling recreational adult cannabis right away, and we can continue to work on the other things around social equity and additional users in the future. But based on concentration of impact, and ultimately, the scope of their establishments don't change, and we can allow the other uses to exist in Grand Rapids, but those still don't bring in any tax dollars to Grand Rapids. So, in this time of economic uncertainty, as we continue to look for ways to help small businesses be successful and to ways to stabilize the economy, there's the potential to bring in at least $1 million of tax revenue by allowing adult use sales in Grand Rapids, and the existing medical licenses to be able to transition to recreational sales would allow for tax dollars to begin to be collected immediately to help us through recovery, to help us through social equity efforts, to help us through a whole lot of stuff. And so, again, it doesn't change the concentration of impact. It does not change the impact on the neighborhoods in which they've already been approved. It just lets tax dollars and jobs be created.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner O'Connor. I'm assuming, though, you're supportive of my initial question about fast tracking the processors, growers, and transporters. You would just like that extended. I just want to make sure.
I'm full support of that. I just want to see the existing medical provisioning centers be included in the fast track.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner. So I think that will be my recommendation, that we do the full briefing at our next meeting. But in the meantime, we ask staff to fast track at least those three uses, and then we can follow up with each of you on your thoughts about Commissioner O'Connor's other recommendation. Good. All right. Okay. So again, I appreciate all of you. I know that we are in this together, and I'm really grateful to continue to serve with all of you as we navigate this, not just the pandemic, but also moving our city forward in a more just and equitable way. So thank you so much for your work. I think I'm going to recommend, even though I know we're running late, I need a 5-minute break and before Economic Development Project Team. So my colleagues who are joining me for that meeting, maybe we can just take a 5-minute break and then reconvene for that meeting. The rest of you, I will plan to see you tonight. But I'm sure I'll be talking to many of you in between now and 7 o'clock. All right. Thank you. Thank you, City Manager.